It happened before most of Los Angeles had finished its first cup of coffee. The announcement came early. Before the morning shows. Before the beat reporters had settled into their routines. Before the people who follow this team closely enough to check their phones the moment they wake up had even reached for the device on their nightstand. It came in the quiet hour, the hour when organizations release information they want absorbed slowly, without the noise of a full news cycle surrounding it, without cameras waiting and microphones extended and follow-up questions lined up 3 deep. Early morning announcements in baseball are never accidents. They are choices. And this particular collection of decisions compressed into a single organizational statement released before sunrise on what should have been an ordinary day, was a choice that said everything about where the Dodgers are right now, and what they believe is required to get where they need to go. 4 moves. 1 announcement. 1 morning. Kike Hernandez, returning. 3 regulars, permanently removed from the 40-man roster. Nick Drier, placed on the injured list. And somewhere in the room where these decisions landed hardest, somewhere in the space between the phone call and the reality, between the news and the feeling of it, Espinoza in tears. This is not a routine transaction wire. This is a program reset. And it happened before the city woke up. Start with Hernandez. Because Hernandez is where the confusion begins. 24 hours ago, less than that, in some tellings of the timeline, Kike Hernandez was finished. Not struggling. Not on the edge. Finished. The word forfeited had been used. A permanent ban had been announced. A contract had been terminated with the kind of finality that organizations use when they want the door not just closed but sealed. And now he was coming back. Fully. That was the word in the announcement. Not on a conditional basis. Not in a reduced role. Not as a depth piece activated out of necessity while the organization searched for alternatives. Fully. Tomorrow. Back in the uniform. Back in the lineup. Back inside the structure that had, by all public accounts, expelled him permanently less than a day before. Sit with that timeline for a moment. Permanent bans that last less than 48 hours are not really permanent bans. They are something else. They are pressure. They are message. They are the organizational equivalent of a door slammed hard enough to shake the walls, not because you intend to keep it closed forever, but because you need everyone in the building to feel the impact. Friedman knew this when he made the first decision. He knew it when he made this one. The question is not whether the reversal is surprising. The question is what it cost. What Hernandez agreed to. What conversation happened in the hours between the termination and the reinstatement, what was said, by whom, and whether the words exchanged in that room represent a genuine reset or simply the temporary resolution of a conflict that hasn't finished resolving itself. Nobody answered that question publicly this morning. The announcement spoke for itself. Or rather, it spoke without explaining itself, which is a different thing entirely. But Hernandez's return is almost the quietest part of this story. 3 regulars. Permanently removed from the 40-man roster. Not optioned. Not designated for assignment with the possibility of a return through waivers and negotiation and the ordinary mechanisms that baseball uses to keep doors open. Removed. From the 40-man. Permanently. 3 of them. In a single announcement. Before sunrise. The 40-man roster is not a casual list. It is the organizational boundary, the line that separates players who are part of a team's protected future from players who exist outside that protection. To remove someone from the 40-man permanently is to say, without ambiguity, that they are not part of any version of the future this organization is building. Not this year's version. Not next year's. Not the version that exists in the planning meetings and the prospect rankings and the long-view conversations that happen in front offices when the season is still young enough to be reshaped. 3 players crossed that line this morning. 3 players went from being part of the Dodgers' protected organizational structure to being entirely outside it, simultaneously, without warning, before the rest of the league had time to react and claim and negotiate and complicate. The speed of it was itself a statement. When an organization moves that fast, it is because speed is the point. Because deliberation would create space for things to become complicated, and complicated is not what Friedman wanted this morning. He wanted clean. 3 names off the roster. 3 roster spots opened. 3 futures redirected in a direction that the Dodgers organization had decided, sometime in the overnight hours, was no longer the same direction they were traveling. Clean. Then Drier. Nick Drier, who 24 hours ago was a pitcher at the center of a story, the man on the mound in the 6th inning, the man whose name became attached to a clash that ended a teammate's career, the man who represented in some ways everything the organization was trying to protect when it made its initial harsh decisions. Now on the injured list. The timing of an IL placement, like the timing of an early morning announcement, is never accidental in professional baseball. Players go on the injured list when they are injured, yes. But the moment chosen to make that placement official, the morning after a night of organizational upheaval, bundled into an announcement that also reversed a permanent ban and removed 3 players from the protected roster, is a moment chosen deliberately. What does Drier's IL placement mean inside this particular sequence of events? It means the 6th inning conversation is paused. Not resolved, paused. Drier is no longer available, which means the questions that attach themselves to his presence in that inning, the clash, the breakdown, the moment the interim manager identified as the turning point, those questions have nowhere immediate to land. They float. They wait. They will return when Drier returns, whenever that is, and the organization will have to decide at that point what the narrative around him looks like in a clubhouse that has been entirely restructured in the time he was away. The injured list, in this context, is not just medical. It is also organizational breathing room. A moment for the dust to settle. A moment for the story to move on far enough that what comes next doesn't have to carry the full weight of what just happened. Friedman understands the injured list the way he understands everything, as a tool. One of many. Used this morning as part of a package of decisions that, taken together, amount to something much larger than any single component. And then Espinoza. This is the moment in the announcement that resists the clean, transactional language of roster management. Because Espinoza, wherever he received this news, however the phone call came or the message arrived or the knock landed on the door in the early morning, was in tears. Not frustrated. Not angry. Not quietly absorbing the information with the professional detachment that athletes are trained to present to the world when the world is watching. Tears. Visible. Real. The kind of emotional response that breaks through the professional surface when the news is bad enough and the surprise is complete enough and the gap between what you believed your future looked like and what it actually looks like is wide enough to make the distance feel impossible to cross. The harsh decision. Those are the words attached to it. Not an unfair decision, the word used was harsh. Which is a specific choice. Harsh does not mean wrong. Harsh means that the truth of it, the weight of it, the cost of it to the person absorbing it, is real and significant and cannot be softened by any amount of organizational language or professional context. Espinoza was not expecting this. That much is clear from the tears. Players who see roster decisions coming, who have been managed toward the exit through declining playing time and careful conversations and the gradual withdrawal of opportunity, do not cry at the announcement. They have already processed it. The grief comes earlier, in the private moments when the direction becomes clear before it becomes official. Espinoza's tears mean the direction wasn't clear. Means this morning's announcement arrived before he had the chance to prepare for it. Means that somewhere between yesterday's game and this morning's sunrise, the Dodgers decided that the timeline for this particular decision was now, not later, not at a more comfortable moment, not after a conversation that might have softened the edges of what was coming. Now. Before the city woke up. Somewhere in the Dodgers clubhouse, in the aftermath of all of this, one man watched it unfold without being asked to do anything except continue. Shohei Ohtani. His name appears at the end of the announcement almost as a postscript. A single word, reported by those in the room, describing his response to the morning's events. Not a quote. Not a press conference statement. Not a carefully worded reaction delivered through a translator and shaped by a PR process. Eyes. Just that. Ohtani's eyes. The reporters who were present, who watched him absorb the information, who looked for the reaction that his face would give even when his words gave nothing, settled on that single physical detail as the most honest record of what the morning meant to the player at the center of everything this organization is building toward. Eyes tell the story that professionalism conceals. And what those eyes communicated, in whatever brief moment of unguarded reaction occurred before the professional composure returned, was that Ohtani understood the weight of what the Dodgers had done this morning. Understood it not as an outside observer processing organizational news, but as the player whose presence justifies every difficult decision, every harsh call, every early morning announcement designed to reset a roster toward a standard he has never stopped holding himself to. He did not need to say anything. The eyes said it. Dave Roberts is still managing this team from a distance, present in some ways, absent in others, his voice carried into rooms through phone calls and proxies while the interim structure handles the immediate decisions. What he returns to is not the same team he left. 3 roster spots emptied. 1 player reinstated after a permanent ban. 1 pitcher placed on the injured list. 1 young player crying at a decision he didn't see coming. And a locker room that has now watched the Dodgers organization move with a speed and a severity that leaves no room for doubt about the standard being applied. Roberts built this culture. He built the trust architecture that makes a team function under pressure. He built the expectation that accountability would be consistent and fair and applied with enough humanity that players could absorb it without feeling disposable. What he inherits this morning is the result of that culture being enforced in his absence, enforced hard, enforced fast, enforced in a way that is unmistakably clear but also unmistakably blunt. The interim structure did not have the relational capital that Roberts has built over years. It had only the tools. The decisions. The authority to act. It acted. Roberts will now spend the next weeks rebuilding the connective tissue of a locker room that has been reshaped overnight. Bringing Hernandez back in, making the return feel like a genuine reset rather than an organizational contradiction, while also managing the absence of 3 players whose spots are now empty. While also watching over Drier from a distance and waiting for the moment when that part of the story has to be resumed. While also, in every quiet moment, making sure that the 1 player whose eyes told the whole story this morning, the 1 player whose presence makes all of this worth the turbulence, remains fully, completely, and without reservation committed to what October requires of him. Early mornings in baseball are when organizations tell the truth. Not the polished, press release truth. The real truth. The truth of what they value and what they don't. The truth of who they're building around and who they're building away from. The truth of the distance between the team they were yesterday and the team they're trying to become. This morning, the Dodgers told a complicated truth. Hernandez is back. The door slammed permanently less than 24 hours ago is open again. The punishment was real, real enough to produce a conversation, real enough to change something, real enough that the return is not a return to exactly the same place. But the permanence was the message, not the sentence. 3 others are gone. And for them, the door is not open. Their truth is the other kind, the kind that doesn't have a second announcement. The kind that ends with a morning phone call and a cleared locker and a number no longer on the active list. Drier is on the IL. Espinoza is in tears. Ohtani's eyes saw everything. And somewhere in the front office of a franchise that believes it was built for October, Andrew Friedman closed his laptop before the city woke up, certain, in the way that only people who make irreversible decisions before sunrise can be certain, that the moves made in the dark hours of this morning would look different in the light of a World Series night. That is the bet. It is always the bet. And this morning, they made it before most people were awake to watch them place it.